Hello there. In the previous video we reviewed the concept of the production possibility frontier and dug in a bit deeper about choice and opportunity cost. Now we turn our attention back to Sophie's choices on a desert island. Things are just going to get a bit more complicated. Another person is going to be washed ashore on the island, Edward, from the previous video. Eddie's a little bit older than he was buying jeans or thinking about dates. He passed his economics A-level. His date went well, but they split when she went off to university, so he decided to go on a cross-the-Atlantic solo sailing challenge. Who would have thought it, eh? That was not forecast by the spreadsheet gang, and he ends up being washed ashore on the same island that Sophie's living on after his boat was destroyed by strong winds. And there he is now, in a position that he could not have even foreseen. Once they've made their introductions, and I'm completely going to ignore any cinematic rom-com script here, Sophie shows Edward around the areas she has explored and her wonderful fecund fruit trees and the easy-to-reach fishing grounds along the coast. Being a capable chap in his own right, Eddie immediately asks how he can help and starts thinking about how else he could contribute to the island economy of now 2 people. So, as Eddie joins in with the fruit gathering and the fishing, what do you think happens to the production possibility frontier? Firstly, we start simple and assume that they are both equally productive in catching fish and collecting fruit. We will also allow Sophie to ably produce a second net and a second ladder for Eddie to use. We will also assume that the marginal rate of transformation between fishing and gathering is equal at any point, hence the return to a linear or straight line schedule. Recall that Sophie was able to fetch either 40 pieces of fruit and 20 fish in a day's work, or the other way around, whichever you want to see it. No. But now the island production can double, as Eddie is now joining in, and production for the island doubles to either 40 fish caught in a day or 80 pieces of fruit, or some combination between the two extremes. There is a population of 2. It's a start. No, not yet. They're just good friends, right? Now, what are we assuming here? The biggest assumption is that both individuals have exactly the same productive abilities. If we replace Sophie with Eddie for a day, he would produce the exact same as Sophie does. No difference. Might as well be robots. But they are not. We've also noted in the previous video that resources and talents are unequally distributed, so we can begin to relax the artificial constraints. Consider that Eddie is actually more productive than Sophie when it comes to shooting up ladders and picking fruit. He loves it. Splitting the production possibility frontiers into the individual's frontiers, working alone, we find that Edward's maximum gathering brings in 60 pieces of fruit compared to Sophie's 40. There's Eddie at 60 compared to Sophie's at 40. Sophie, on the other hand, has a knack for spotting piscatory movement, that's fishy moves to you and me, is able to draw in 20 fish relative to Eddie's, which tells us that Sophie has a relative specialisation in catching fish, relative to Eddie, that is. They then make a decision to divide their labour in a simple way. Eddie will go and collect the fruit, and Sophie will head to the coast to fish. Individually, they go and get the maximum in the allotted time. Sophie goes and gets 20 fish, and Eddie brings back 60 pieces of fruit. Total productivity for the island now is 80 units. Between them, they bring more to the table than they would have done alone. Now, this is a powerful concept for us to learn, not just as economists, but as people living amongst colleagues and a world of differing talents and proclivities. Firstly, when we divide our labours according to our talents, we can increase our productivity and the production of our economy. If they were to try it the other way around, Sophie would collect 40 pieces of fruit and Eddie would bring a catch of 15 fish, a total of 55 units. Hence this shows how beneficial that specialising in our tasks is. It's a useful principle, but it's not the only principle here. There's always more to learn. In this slide, we can add the 2 linear production possibility frontiers together to create a joint PPF, from which we can review competing choices for the 2 of them from the extremes of working in isolation, that is, Sophie's 20 fish and Edward's 60 fruits, to a combined production frontier. For instance, if they spent all their time fishing together, they could net 35 fish in their work time. If they spent their time together collecting fruit, they could bring in 100 units of fruit. So maximum fish production for the economy, now seen on the joint schedule, is 35, but there's no fruit. If we go to the fruit-only choice, economic production increases to 100 units, which may seem the better option on a spreadsheet, but they're not keen on just eating fruit and suffering the digestive consequences, so they can choose to produce both fruit and fish. Now, where on the production possibility frontier they want to be depends on several factors. For instance, their joint taste or preference for fish versus fruit, and their preference to work together or to work alone for a few hours. Each one of the green dots on the joint frontier indicates a reasonable choice of production for them. Reasonable in this context, in the sense that the values ignore fractions of a fish, like catching a head or just a fin. The next slide shows the table of values that produce this graph. Sophie and Eddie both have negative linear functions that begin with the y-intercept indicating their maximum fish production respectively, 20 for Sophie, 15 for Eddie. The respective gradients are derived from the maximum fish caught divided by the maximum fruit picked for each. The joint frontiers shows the total fish netted and the fruit gathered. We noted on the graph that the maximum economic production was 100 units of fruit. But then we considered that the fruitarian diet might not suit either of them, and that a better choice would lie somewhere between 32 fish and 8 fruit and 1 fish and 96 fruit. They could choose anywhere along the production possibility frontier as a point of efficiency still. Let's say they pick point A, which represents a catch of 20 fish and 40 pieces of fruit. This is less than if either head off to different parts of the island and worked alone to secure a total of 80 units, but it suits their joint preferences not to be overwhelmed with fruit and to work together. Point A. We can use an arrow to point to their individual production frontiers and to see that they both catch 10 fish each and 20 pieces of fruit, but they don't have to be at A. If they chose B, for instance, because their preference for fish is greater than fruit, we can show that Sophie is now contributing 16 fish and 8 pieces of fruit, and Eddie 13 fish and also 8 pieces of fruit, which can be validated on the table. These are the table of values. So B, the row here would be for 16 fish for Sophie, 8 fruit, so a total of 24. Eddie, 13 fish, 8 fruit, a total of 21. Total fish for both of them, 29, total fruit, 16. 45 total units for their economy, much less than the 100, but it shows their preference for producing more fish at this time compared to fruit. Finally, we can make each's frontier a bit more realistic. The graph shows Sophie's and Eddie's production possibility frontiers being represented by non-linear functions, indicating that they're marginal, or the next unit of production as they shift between fish and fruit production changes. It's not linear anymore. Both Sophie and Eddie's frontier indicate that as they reduce their fishing by 1 unit at a time, they can gather more than 1 piece of fruit. But Sophie's preference for fishing begins to show as her graph steepens, indicating that for each extra fish she does not catch, her increase in fruit gathering becomes less and less. She doesn't enjoy going up and down the ladders as much as waiting for and catching fish. Eddie, on the other hand, also shows a decline in how much extra fruit he gathers relative to dropping a fish, but less so than Sophie's. Indeed, Sophie stops at 40, while Eddie continues to gather more fruit, again showing his relative specialisation as a guy who likes to run up and down ladders picking fruit. I've also created a table for this, which is represented in the following slide. Again, because it's relatively easy to gather fruit, we can see that the economy's maximum production remains at 100 units, but that is only captured by fruit gathering, and it's not something they both want to focus on. And as with the linear diagrams, neither Edward nor Sophie want to spend all their days just collecting fruit, so their preference is for, say, point A here, representing catching 22 fish and collecting 64 pieces of fruit. From the table, that's Sophie netting 13 fish and Edward 9, while she collects 24 to Edward's 40 pieces of fruit, the arrows identifying their respective quantities from point A. The total production at A is 86. That's 14 less than the maximum of 100, but that 100 represents an unhealthy diet for them and not their preferred choice. We are still in the mode of simplifying economic principles, and that is necessary. Otherwise, we will become untethered from the principles quite quickly. It's also not beyond our realm of the imagination to bring in more people into our diagrams and different choices. In the next video, I want to introduce another powerful idea, that in expanding their ability to produce essential goods, they can save time by working together and put more effort into doing other productive endeavours, such as constructing safe shelters, securing water sources, and so on. Thank you for listening. I hope this helps. I look forward to any comments.